Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this evening's event. We're deeply honored to have a old, if I may call, India hand as our speaker today. 2 hands, he says, 2 hands. Dr. Stephen Huyler, and it's a real pleasure to have you address the Museum Society of Bombay. And I welcome you on behalf of everyone present here. I must, at the outset, thank Dr. Supriya Rai, for putting us in touch with Dr. Stephen and their old friends. And we were absolutely delighted. He came to India 50 plus years ago. And the title of his talk, as you all must have seen from the invitation, it seems to have transformed his life. So the title is Transformed by India, a Life. He came here many, many years ago at the invitation of Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay. And he's almost dedicated his life, like many scholars who come to India, and there are several who have addressed us, that they come here and they start a great love affair. They come every summer with their students. They come on their own. They pick up a topic and they research it and they research it and they discover something new every time. So it's really been a life dedicated to exploring, surveying, persevering, and I love this, celebrating India's rich artistic and cultural heritage. I quote from what Dr. Stephen sent me. And he's traveled through many, many parts of India, Indian villages, for an average of 4 months each year. An art historian, cultural anthropologist, photographer, and author, he has been consultant and guest curator for more than 25 major museum exhibitions on Indian art, with solo exhibitions at the National Crafts Museum in New Delhi, the National Museum of Asian Art at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco, and several others. He's written many, many books. Some of them he's very kindly put on display here, which invoke an India rarely seen by outsiders. Their places, people, customs, which are today not known even by many of us Indians. So there's a lot to learn when we read his books. I'm not going to stand between the speaker and all of you. So I'd like Dr. Stephen to come forward.
I came to India when I was 19. I was invited by Beatrice Wood, an American artist, one of the founders of the Dada movement, when I was 17, 18, and I began to take courses at university to prepare. I turned from a very poor student to a straight A student, a 4-point student, because of India. And I did a major focus for my undergraduate degree on Indian studies in 7 different departments, and I was the only one. It was marvelous. Because my parents were and my whole family were in the education field, I knew that teachers and administrations like students with initiative, and I certainly had initiative once I discovered India. I found everything came together for me. Beatrice Wood invited me to India, and I was to travel with her, but then she canceled her trip, and I persuaded my very unusual parents to allow me to go overland by local transport. Whoa! And we just went halfway around the world in a second. So this is me with my mother, age 19, at Los Angeles International Airport, just leaving for India to go overland. I took a flight to Paris, and began this trek across Asia that began in Paris and went by local transport, by myself, local train, local bus. Took me 2 months to reach India, and during which time I had studied Islamic hadith and Islamic design. So I just found Turkey and Iran and Afghanistan and Pakistan fascinating, but I was really focused on getting to India. It was a good time of transition. I arrived on my 20th birthday in Amritsar across the border in 1971, late October. My birthday is October 27th, so it was just before war. I came to Delhi. Beatrice had not come. She decided that, she had to cancel, and then she did come. But before she got there, I was in Delhi, and I met Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay, my first day in India. That is a phenomenal, the beginning of a phenomenal life. Kamaladevi ji tutored, mentored, affected me in every fiber of my being. And I realized that more than ever this last summer when I read her new biography, that really helped me understand truly how profound her effect was. So when I met Kamaladevi, she asked me to come back the next day with a map, the map that I showed you, and I was to mark, it was a National Geographic map, and I was to mark where I wanted to go in India, and she gave me a personal letter that she sent ahead to more than 60 of India's greats, of individuals who had been freedom fighters, most of them, or many of them, but they were the women largely who set up the crafts cooperatives and Khadi Bhavans and other institutions around India. And they were my hosts. So they invited me in, God knows why. I was just this young whippersnapper, a 19 or 20-year-old. But Beatrice was also a close friend of Rukmini Devi Arundel. So I went, Beatrice came into Delhi and we flew together. It was the first time I had flown, except to Paris. But she wasn't well, so we flew down to Madras together, and I lived at Kalakshetra for my first month, or after my first few weeks, but my second month, we'll say, for the month of December. And I began my own field research study for my undergraduate degree on Ayanar terracotta of Tamil Nadu. These are photographs that I took in 1971 and early 72 of shrines. I'm very interested in the ephemeral, in the concept that art could be made for one moment only, and that it no longer has a value to either the person who's made it or the place where it is given once it is dedicated. That is something that to the Western mentality is a very odd, but to me, a really moving concept. But so I also studied kolam. So I did 2 research papers, one on Ayanar terracottas, I can't see any of you, so I'll just sort of look like this every once in a while, and one on kolams. So I began to, again, as ephemeral art that is made every single day of the year in a different design, a different pattern by women in more than 1 million houses. That concept to me was extraordinary. And so I began studying kolams and the making of them, and I drew lots of designs. I photographed the design books of women, and I interviewed the women. But I came back to the United States at the end of that year to my fiancée, Helene Huyler. We were married 2 years later, and we came to India in 1974, overland the same way, except that this time we took 4 months. when we did that 4-month trip, we were so young, 23, that I was too naive to realize that it would have such a profound effect on Helene, my wife, in that she just needed to go home by the time she got to India. It was 4 months of intensive travel. I was raised by a family that traveled. She was not. And she wanted to do what I did, and so she did it, but it was exhausting to her. So we spent our first anniversary in Udaipur at the Lake Palace, which was so inexpensive at that time. It had just been taken over by the Taj, that we had a 6-room suite for 1,850 rupees. I have the record. That was all food and tea and the room for our anniversary. But Helene became gradually crushed, not by India, but by the travel, by the experience, it was just too much for her, and she got sick. She caught a cold. It was December, and it's cold season, and she caught a cold that turned into pneumonia. We didn't treat it correctly. We were in Gujarat by that point, in Ahmedabad. We didn't treat it correctly. We thought we were. She got more and more ill, and we came to Mumbai in exactly 50 years ago today, with my wife diagnosed as having serious TB, and we were supposed to check into, I can't think of the name of the hospital. I'm just going blank, excuse me. The larger hospital, and they would not accept her. So I called someone in Delhi, frantic, that was a friend, and he arranged for her to go into Breach Candy. She went into Breach Candy in exactly 50 years ago today, was diagnosed as having a rare lung disease. A man named, a Dr. Udwadia, did surgery on her. And when he came out after 8 hours of surgery, he said, "I'm sorry." I'm sorry, excuse me. He said, "I'm sorry, your wife probably will not survive." That was in the first year of our marriage, or just one. And so she did survive. I called her parents and I said, "This is what's happening." They got on a plane and they flew to Mumbai. They would never have come, I don't think, to India. They didn't like to travel. And they came to Mumbai, and by that time she was recovering. And they put themselves up and me up at the Taj, right over there. And we'd been living on a shoestring of a few dollars a day, and here, except for the Lake Palace, and here we were. I was at the Taj while Helene was in the hospital. She was 2 months in Breach Candy, and then she was released. Her parents were only here for 5 days, and they went back. She was released only on the understanding that she would go to the Taj where the air was pure, because she only had 1/4 of one lung. She had no other lung. Her left lung was gone, and her right lung, she just had 1/4 of it, and she had to rebuild it again. And she would have been susceptible to diseases were she out in normal circumstances in any place. So her parents put us up at the Taj. So we spent a further 6 weeks on the 6th floor, old wing, what's now called the Taj Palace. And I got to know Mumbai and got to love it during those 3.5 months. It's a homecoming here. Yes, 50 years ago tonight was a sad time, but also the months following it, as she began to reconstruct her strength, we're still married very happily, and she has strong lungs. I learned to love the city of yours. So I'm really delighted, Feroza, to be invited to come back today, of all days, to celebrate. This was our view. You know it. But so I began to do continued to do what I had started to do, and that is a cross-cultural survey of Indian folk arts and crafts, the villages and what they made, rural crafts, throughout the subcontinent. And my choice, my decision was to, and with Kamaladevi's encouragement and Rukmini Devi's encouragement, was to canvass India. So there are many fine scholars who would work in one area or a comparison of 2 or 3 areas, but I was trying to fill in the gaps. And I was traveling throughout the subcontinent and have now for 54 years. So I have been in virtually every district of peninsular India, and I've been documenting what the villages are like, what their layout is, what the people are, what they do, how they relate in families, how they live, how they learn, how they teach their children, the crafts as part of that. So I have now, I got my PhD at SOAS, at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, in art and archaeology with Pia Brancusi there. But my work is really looking at art on a broader sense of how does it fit into people's lives. And I study history because I have degrees in Indian history as well, and I'm fascinated by Indian history, but I also am trying to understand the contemporary, feel the pulse of the contemporary, because I am one of those people that does not feel that India has lost itself. I think India is constantly reinventing itself and gaining. It's always creative. You people are remarkable. And so what I have been doing is documenting that, starting with the villages. But then I look today, and I'll end this lecture with showing you a comparison of old and new. So it's looking at the people and trying to understand what it is that they are, what they feel about themselves, what people, particularly in rural India, but most people in India at that time lived in rural areas. The urbanites were a small percentage. That has changed. But it was 70% of the population was in Indian villages at that time, in communities of less than 5,000 back in the 70s and early 80s. And that ended up in a book, Village India, by a good publisher. That's the only book that I did not bring here. I just am lugging heavy, carrying heavy books. But I'd still stand by this book. It was a good publisher, Abrams, that commissioned me to write it. I refused. I'm a writer. First and foremost, a writer. I love writing. I love the language. I love to try to express myself. But I did not write a word for publication for the first 10 years because I felt that the biggest mistake of foreigners is to write about India before they have matured in understanding it. I think that people keep making mistakes and they repeat mistakes by other scholars or foreigners who have come here but were too green to really understand what it was they were seeing. So I decided quite intentionally that I would not write for the first 10 years, and then I began to write. So this was about 12 or 14 years in. I wrote a few smaller things first, and then I began to collate the material for my doctoral dissertation, which was on a survey of Indian terracotta art, potters, and their vessels, as well as their sculptures that were made as votive gifts throughout 14 Indian states. And it was at the time, still is actually, the most complex and detailed survey of Indian potters' art. So it began with the making of vessels in different ways. This is Orissa on the left. The firing of vessels, that happens to be in Gujarat, and the painting also in Gujarat, or the decoration of vessels. It was about carrying vessels from the potters, delivering them in different ways, because there are many photographs in the book. It's right there if you want to look at it. To market, and then the purchasing of them, what that meant to the economy within the village communities. And then taking them home and using them, the different matkas or whatever it might be, for storing or preparing of food. But I also began studying sacred vessels like this Tulsi Chora in Orissa, which is created or was created, and it had never been documented before, in the form of the gopuram of Orissan temples. And then it's to hold Tulsi as Vrindavati and worshipped on the spot in many villages in Puri district. And I just found that fascinating. So I made a whole study of Tulsi and the use of historical use, meaning, and values of Tulsi. But I continued my work, a survey of votive terracottas at the same time. So I spent some years in Tamil Nadu. I ended up working for Rukmini Devi for 4 years and living at Kalakshetra with Helene, with my wife. We loved it. But while I was doing that work at Kalakshetra, I would go off on weekends into rural Tamil Nadu and document the terracotta horses, but also the votive figures that were given to shrines. The horses to the far right are the largest terracotta sculptures ever known in the history of mankind, and I discovered them in a rural village. And I mean that. I've now lectured about that for over 40 years, and I have yet to have anyone challenge that point of view. These terracotta horses are made in one piece and fired on the spot, and these were 19th century and they're still there. But most of them crumble and fall apart and are recycled. And then I did a survey of votive terracottas, which are in every district in the subcontinent virtually, given to sacred trees, to the Gramadevta, the deity of a community. And they are often horses, they might be elephants, they could be cows, they could be human figures, but more often they're horses. On the left in this case in Orissa, on the right in Bengal, but really they're everywhere. These are in Karnataka, in South Kannada district, and are discovered by farmers in their fields and are collected together and are believed to be made by the mother goddess. They're not made today by potters. And then my work on wall and floor painting by women came out. Was commissioned by Rizzoli and Thames and Hudson to create the book on the left, and then there were French and German editions. And that was quite popular, and that was really generated the first of my exhibitions of photography. My photography had improved over the years. I now have somewhere about 250,000 slides, transparencies of India, and then digital photography I've been doing since it began in the late 90s, and there are, I don't know how many, probably another 80 or 100,000 of those. And I've just given them all to the Museum of Art and Photography in Bangalore day before yesterday. So they are going there. And they are for the Indian people. I do not want ownership. I've done books. I've had my day. But they really need to be a record for the people, because what I was doing was recording India, rural India, and the kinds of arts that I've talked about and will continue to talk about at a time when nobody was recording it. And that's why I did it. It needed to be done. Somebody had to do it. So these are just some of the photographs of different aspects of women's ephemeral arts, starting with columns. And notice that the left one here at the top has a cross in it. It's Christian, because it's pan-Indian in South India. As I said, more than 1 million homes. Here is for Surya Puja during Pongal festival in a home. Or this, I mean, isn't this amazing? This is sometimes often columns are done on a grid of dots, as you know, or Alpona or Rangoli, and connect the dots. But this is all freehand. And this woman does that every day in a different design and never repeats a design. Think of what that means. The breadth of creativity, the breadth of artistic expression is just fabulous. Just magnificent. And that is an aspect of your culture, and it's everywhere, or it was. It's changing. This is in mandana on the left, on the ground, and wall painting in among the Meena people of eastern Rajasthan, tribal people, Adivasi people. These are in Kerala, Chattopadhyay, done for preparation for wedding or for marriage, celebration of marriage. It lasts for 10 days during Onam festival. And in Orissa, where women will repaint their mud walls with a mixture, with a gobar mitti, mixture of cow dung and clay, and cover over old designs, and then use rice paste from their own rice fields. They grind the rice down with mix it with water. It goes on clear and dry. It's an opaque white, as you can see in the left hand here, very rapidly in the sun. And the designs, the breadth of artistic expression on the walls there. This is one house, 1 week apart. Same house, same door, same woman. Look at it. It's just incredible. Never repeat a design. This is, I'm afraid, slightly out of order. So we're back to the Meenas here. I apologize. I think somehow I did this late at night. But look at these elephants, these Meena elephants here. They're just marvelous designs. Or these, there's a whimsy, the tigers and the woman with the pots on her head, and the man with a horse, and another woman with a pot on her head. Or this, which on the right you can see a scooter on the Vespa, but on the bottom is a camel-drawn cart, and there's in the lower left-hand corner is a tiger scratching fleas. Because we all want to get rid of fleas if we have them. And here they do the mandana on the ground with just use their fingers, and they drip the paint, which in this case isn't rice, because in eastern Rajasthan they don't grow rice, so it's white lime. But isn't it wonderful, the creative expression? So I never tire of this. I have thousands and thousands and thousands of photographs of them, which are now all in, or will be all in Bangalore and available to the public. So they also do mud bas-relief on the interiors of the Meena homes. This is now in western Rajasthan, Jaisalmer district, where I'm going on Monday. And the women there once each year for Diwali, because they have, it's less than 5 inches of rain per year. So they don't have much water to work with to waste, or it's not waste because it's for Lakshmi, it's for Diwali, but that's the only time they can do it. They cover their walls, stone walls, with camel dung mixed with water and clay, and then they do these geometric abstractions, which are traditional. So the women there in these villages who are illiterate have never seen geometric abstraction, but as far as we might know it in 20th and 21st century art, but look at it. It's just fabulous. And these are their interiors, their niches, their shrines, the places in which they hold their utensils. Magnificent. I also studied Jodhpur back in the day. I first went to Jodhpur, and this area, which is now, I named the Blue City in Painted Prayers, the book. As far as I know, it wasn't called that before, because it had been a white city when I first went in 1971. There were not blue houses. But one woman mixed too much bluing in with her whitewash. Remember that pure white, is only achieved by adding blue, which makes it whiter, ironically. So anyway, she mixed in too much bluing with her whitewash, and she liked the effect and made her house a darker blue. And then the neighbors got jealous, and they painted their houses. And I watched the whole city turn blue. And now I've watched it all turn back white. So now most of Brahmpuri and Jodhpur is white again, and some other colors, and a few blue houses, but not very many. Times change. It's their homes. They should be able to do what they want. But it was wonderful to make a record of it while it lasted. And then in Gujarat, the Rabari women were traditionally nomadic, but they now live in mud homes, and they do mud bas-relief on their walls and inlay them with mirrors. And the interiors are quite wonderful, including this storage unit that has light bulbs that are purely decorative. There's no electricity in this house. So here I had been doing all this work for up until the mid-90s, when I was contacted by the director of the new Arthur M. Sackler Gallery at the Smithsonian and asked if I'd be willing to do an exhibition on Hinduism, on their Hindu art in the show. And I said, in the reserve collections, and I said, yes, I would, but only if they allowed me to show them in context, as they were meant to be seen, dressed and adorned. Because what I had learned over the years among all my Hindu friends, there was a certain amount of resentment for the fact that a work of art, let's just say this is a murti, would be put on a pedestal and looked at only from its artistic value, but not from its meaning, its greater meaning. So I said, I will only do it if you allow me to dress and adorn your sculptures and reconsecrate them. So then I came back to India and I began documenting. I already had been, but I began documenting Hindu practice, rituals in villages, towns, and cities, from the beginning of prayers of the day to household shrines to different kinds of small shrines and temples. To tree shrines, sacred Gram Devata shrines, to the concept of sound. This is a temple up in Himachal Pradesh which doesn't have a murti but does have just bells. I also found one near Madurai, outside Madurai, that has no murti. It just has sound, divine sound. Isn't that marvelous? But that's sort of foreign to concepts of, in a way it's foreign to, say, Christianity. Certainly we have Gregorian chants, we have beautiful music in churches and cathedrals, but God isn't considered to just be sound, but it is, by most Christians, but it can be in India. Offerings, arti, the concept of what does that mean, the different aspects of rituals, different shrines, murti being dressed and adorned in different ways so that they're not devoid of the adoration. They're not devoid of the rituals that go about to show one's respect to a murti as divinity. So the abhishek, the dressing of a Shiva linga, the ardinara and in puja, but the aspect that, again, going back to the ephemeral, because so much of Hindu worship is ephemeral, is that concept that it's not a congregational religion in most cases. It is one of individual relationship to the divine, like this woman praying. Or the Visarjan, the images that go back to the water, and are recycled. So I did this exhibition at the Smithsonian, at the Arthur M. Sackler Gallery, which is now called our National Gallery of Asian Art. And, excuse me, I'm just going to keep that up for a second. It was opened in 1996, as you can see. It was supposed to be open for 6 months, but it was so popular that it remained open for 4 full years and had 750,000 clicked. The guards had a little clicker, 750,000 visitors. We didn't create a book for it because all of the budget went into an educational outreach program that had a booklet and a whole little box for the children, and it was sent out in tens of thousands of copies to schools, and that's one of the reasons we had so many visitors. It was really popular. So the book was about Hinduism and what the practice of Hinduism is. I wrote the little booklet. And then there were posters, and there was agarbati, and there was a little arti, and the children could be taught of how it should be done. And at least how they could be taught. It might not have been exactly accurate. This was then the exhibition at the Smithsonian that was open for 4 years, starting with these remarkable crystal linga and yoni from Kashmir. and into the entrance where we did dress. They reconsecrated these processional images that were chola, that were in their collection. And also there's a linga there in the center of sort of a shrine. I mean, I didn't design the space. There was a museum designer that was there. We did have a tree shrine, or sort of a tree shrine to the right with terracottas under it, different images. And then because of the popularity of that show, I traveled it, but the show itself couldn't travel. The objects were too valuable. The insurance would have been millions of dollars, and we couldn't do that, and they didn't want them to leave the museum. So I created an interactive show about personal Hinduism that traveled to several museums and ended up at the Museum of Natural History in New York, where there were pujas that took place. The images were addressed and adorned. This was the show itself, the interior. There were some of my photographs, but the reason why I so much wanted to do it at the American Museum of Natural History was because I visited it when I was about 8 or 9, and I was fascinated by the dioramas that they created that looked real but were not. I just found that spellbinding. And so I said, okay, if I'm going to bring this show here, I need to have a banyan tree. So they sent me back to India, and I took about several hundred photographs of banyan trees, and I brought back samples of leaves and bark, and they made me a tree. And it was to house, in a sense, or to be there so that these Naga images that had been accessed to the museum in 1843 could be displayed. They'd never been displayed. But they didn't want to be displayed in a glass case. They wanted to be displayed dressed and adorned as they should be. And then I was up a ladder. I had brought these cloths back and these little cradle figures from Tamil Nadu, and I put the sindoor and haldi on the tree. I actually got blisters because it was so rough, the bark, and I had to kind of make up for what would otherwise have taken place by a lot of humans, a lot of people, devotees over, years. I had to do it rather rapidly. And I commissioned this wooden shrine to be made in Mahabalipuram that had a figure in it that was a Shiva figure dressed. But because images couldn't be taken from a temple, I took photographs of, when I was allowed, of the Garbhagriha of a temple, and then I created or invented the concept of using a standing light box with the image above it, and then objects that were used in devotion in front of it. So on the left are the doors closed, on the right are the doors open, and each visitor to the museum would be asked to open and close. I discovered that kind of opened, this was in the Smithsonian one, I discovered by having a wooden shrine that had doors that open and close, that it kind of opened people to their own hearts. There was an aspect of that. So here's a Ganesh shrine, but there were many. There were 12 different shrines, different deities, as well as this Gauri image that was dressed and adorned. And there was a film about the making of the purchasing of the fabrics and dressing and adorning this Gauri in Rajasthan. And there were videos throughout the show, etc. Anyway, that was the exhibition, Meeting God. My whole life changed, as did much of the world, 2 days after its opening. The book was just released, 60,000 copies of this book in full color. The exhibition opened on the 8th of September, 2001. On the 11th of September 2001, the World Trade Center was bombed. And on the 11th of September 2001, that on the right side was the back page of the New York Times, Meeting God. And my life, as so many others, was never the same after that. So the show closed 2 days after it was open. And it was closed for a month. And then it reopened and it became a sanctuary. It was unintended. It wasn't expected. Who could have known about 9/11? The world changed on 9/11. We're now a suspicious people in America and elsewhere. I mean, we suspect, we are doubtful. Look at our immigration policies now. we doubt, we don't trust people anymore, but so does the world. You know, it's untrusting in the way that it used to. It's changed. But at any rate, I moved ahead. I started to say that the exhibition became a place of sanctuary. The New York Times, there was an editorial article about people coming to the shrine and just sitting. People would just sit in prayer, 60, 80, 100 people, not in congregation, but just trying to find answers, trying to understand what had happened to them, to the world, to their loved ones. So that was 9/11, and I had to figure out what was I going to do. So I could no longer work on that. The subject matter was not of interest to the American people. The book was remaindered, it didn't sell, even though Yale University Press had printed 60,000 copies. It was remaindered, meaning it sold for a few dollars each. This beautiful color book, there's a copy on the table. And I had to figure out, what am I going to do? So I thought about painted prayers and its success. And so I spent the next few years traveling through India and documenting women's identity in India that ended up as this book, Daughters of India. And so I interviewed more than 1,000 women. I'm a feminist. I very much believe in women's identity and empowerment and strength. And for many years, when I go back, when I'm in the States or in England, when I was in university there, the people, I would say I work in India, and the people's first reaction, the first comment was, oh, those poor women. My experience, I'm a white American male. You can't get more privilege than that. You can't get more entitlement than that. But my experience is that women in India are often, as elsewhere in the world, there are many injustices perpetrated towards women, but women here do not identify themselves as victims. And there are so many books that look at, and articles that look at Indian women as victims, who they are not. I find women everywhere who are, they may have a tremendously difficult life, like I've worked in the Mumbai slums, for example, extensively. But the women don't consider themselves victims. The people don't consider themselves victims. They consider themselves, how can we improve our lives? What can we do to put bread on the table for our children or ensure that they will be educated and have a better life? That's the pulse of Indian women. So I interviewed more than 1,000 women throughout the subcontinent, and I decided that I didn't want to make the generalizations that other people make about Indian women. So rather than do that, I chose 20 women from as many different aspects of Indian culture as I could, from north to south, from east to west, from wealthy to Dalit, to very poor, from doyen to very disenfranchised women. From a doctor on the far right to a woman in Chhattisgarh, who we'll talk about soon, and different aspects. But all of the women I allowed to tell their story themselves, or I tried as much as possible to allow them to tell their stories themselves, and I did a photo essay of each woman, of the 20 women. That was Daughters of India. It was a successful book. This was a woman in Bangalore who she's a Malayali, was the wife of a merchant marine who got bored at home with the children and took a night course in computer programming and sold her business for $30 million. So there are different kinds of success. This woman, Sonabai Rajawar, changed my life. It was one of the things that transformed me. There are many things, as you could gather, that have transformed me. But Sonabai Rajawar was a story I could not let go. Remember, I told you that I'm a cross-cultural surveyor. I don't work on one area. Sonabai changed that. I had to do a monograph on her. I made a film about her and I created an exhibition about her. Sonabai lived when she was married at 16 to a man that was a widower who was considerably her elder. And he was a farmer in Chhattisgarh, in the most remote area I've ever been. But a farmer, and they built their home together in a remote area outside his village. And it had mud walls, no exterior windows, which is common for that region. And once the house was built, they built it together, he closed the door. And he did not allow her outside for 15 years. She was stuck inside. There was an interior courtyard. They had a son. And she had no training as an artist. She began to take clay from the edge of her well and to fashion it into figures so her son would have toys to play with. The son was allowed to go out and play with children, go to school as he got older, but she was not allowed to go out, and she couldn't get him toys, so she made them. And she enjoyed the sculpting process, so she began to add the sculptures to her wall. She used strips of bamboo to make jolly. She'd never seen jolly. There were no jollies in homes in Chhattisgarh district, in that region. None at all. She'd never seen them. She was illiterate. She was uneducated. She didn't ever read a newspaper, but she thought out the concept of making jolly to trap the wind inside her very hot house. As you can imagine, it's hot there in the summer. But she had a courtyard, and this is what she created. She took paints. She created. When these were first made back in the 60s, 70s, she only had paint that she made from using her cooking spices. But then, after 15 years, she was discovered. She was allowed out, and she was discovered by the villagers who were allowed in. I'm not sure why. That fact that she was kept inside is not a cultural mandate. No other women in that region have been treated like that. It was her husband's psychosis, perhaps, because she was beautiful. I don't know. I tried to find out, haven't been able to. I'm her biographer. But these are the jollies. So she then began to use poster paints as bright colors. She began to sculpt the walls of her home with figures that are just delightful. And she transformed the interior of her home into a place of beauty, color, whimsy, humor. You think of what it would be like if you, or if I, were stuck inside a house by some man for 15 years and not allowed to go outside. I might express myself creatively. I am a creative man. But I might express myself darkly, not Sonabai. And that's her story. I believe her story. When I made the film, which is in the book, it's there, in the film, I talked about that, we are taught that the world is a dismal place. We're taught that we've destroyed our resources so much, that we are, so there are wars and all kinds of things that are the bad sides of humanity. But we can use creativity. We can use our own initiative to make change. We don't have to live dismally. We can alter our world with our own creative endeavors. That's Sonabai's message. That's how I've been transformed. So I created this exhibition, which traveled around the United States about Sonabai, from the exterior of what her village was like to the interior of what she made. Just wonderful sculptures. that are in the exhibition. And all of those, as of day before yesterday, are coming to the Museum of Art and Photography permanently, will be there in Bangalore, and they were just given a big space at the Bangalore airport, and they're going to do it for a year at the museum and then move it out to the airport. Pretty cool. So that's permanently. I've given them to the museum. These pieces that she created for my exhibition, I gave her no guidance whatsoever. I just said, create what you want, I'll document it. And she decided to create dance figures of the harvest dance, which meant a lot to her. And so these are the harvest dance. So I created a dance room. I like to push the envelope of how one can exhibit. So I experimented with a studio in New York City, Dugal, an Indian studio. Pushed the envelope, and we printed on chiffon for the first time ever. And I created a dance room where the dancers that I photographed are on, printed on chiffon, and you actually walk through the rooms. So this will be part of that exhibition in Bangalore. And then there was a Dalit woman who lived on the edge of Sonobai's village, had not been trained by Sonobai or influenced by her directly, but she saw what I was doing of documenting the dance, the harvest dance, and she started making these figures, and so I commissioned a whole dance by her. Her name is Parbati Bai. She's still there. This is Parbati Bai. And then these are other artists that after Sonobai was allowed out of isolation by her husband, she began to influence other artists in that region, in that very rural region. And these are their expressions, many of which are dance. So these are in the exhibition too. So that's what I do. I am then finally, the new book, which I actually, there are a few outside. They were supposed to have been delivered here today, and there was a mix-up, so they didn't come. So Supriya Rai arranged for 5 copies to come today, but that's all we've got. But I was just at the Kolkata literary meet to release the book 8 days ago, something like that. It was the first time I'd seen the book. And then to the Hyderabad Literary Festival, which takes place here. I promised to you in the beginning of the lecture that I would show you a before and after. This is the after. This is something called Sattva Knowledge City that's been built in a place that I did field research in 1978. This has become this. So this is the value, perhaps, of my work, or some aspects of my work. The documentation of taking, we'll say, 250,000 images of Indian villages and rural areas. It's all changed and changing. That's not that it's bad. It's just changing. It's just evolving as India has always evolved. India's never been stagnant. It's always been moving. It's always been adapting. This is how it's adapting now. The creativity that I saw and felt and learned expressed in Hyderabad by the young at this festival. They believed that there were 100,000 people at the literary festival, the Hyderabad Literary Festival. There were 80,000 cataloged last year. There were more this year. They were young and vibrant people, fascinated with learning and adaptation. And this is the new India. This is the new India. So I don't want to be hidebound and hold India back from its creative evolution. But it's kind of wonderful to be able to see the difference. And I certainly have been transformed by India. Thank you.